Can people hear me? Yes? Sue's on it? Okay. So welcome everybody to our session, a very brief session, but hopefully a useful one, about the water risks of the textile sector and why we as WWF and our partners have been working on collective action solutions to those risks, and particularly why there's a business case for those kind of activities. So to start with, I'm going to give you a little overview of the links between this sector and water issues, touching not only on their impacts, but actually the wider context. So this is just a little recap. This is an approximation of a textiles value chain. And what we see is there's a high level dependency on clean water sources for a lot of existing processes within textiles. So all the way through the value chain, there's this value at risk, depending on whether we can actually get long-term access to good water sources. We also see a high water pollution impact from a lot of these different processes. And this means that there's almost like a reinforcing circle where those impacts can in turn affect the ability to source clean water. What we've done is a very high-level snapshot of the key sourcing locations for textiles around the world. So looking at global trade data, both the clothing and textile exports from different countries, and also cross-reference with the Open Apparel Register. So really looking at the number of sites that are producing in those key countries, or at least a proxy of it. So what we've identified is there's top 10 key countries around the world that produce textiles and clothing, and then there are some other significant regions in terms of volumes. So what we've done is look at the risks we see in those regions. So this, for example, is base level water stress in these countries. So how much water is being used versus availability. If we not perfectly overlay it with those regions, what we see is there's a huge correlation between those risks and these key production regions. And when we look at actually how much export value is at risk, we see that overall, all these top 10 countries of a longer list, quite a few of them have significantly high risks around base level water stress. And this is equivalent to approximately 15% of that global production value and 114 billion USD. So very, very significant numbers. Now, of course, if the worst happened in all these countries and there were fundamental issues, you wouldn't see the whole sector wiped out. But this is the value that that sector represents and the risks that you see. If we look at pollution, so actual existing surface water pollution, the overlay is also quite stark. And we see, again, around 14% or 11 billion USD at risk. And here, again, you can see that, for example, India and surprisingly Italy are coming up as quite high in terms of those surface water pollution. Untreated wastewater, this is a huge one for this sector because there is such a prevalence of untreated wastewater within maybe the less well-performing sites. And also this kind of impact will directly affect their ability to operate and source the right kinds of water. So the overlay is particularly damning here, where we see it's really almost entirely those regions that produce textiles that have some of the worst issues. This is up to 60% of global production that's affected. So it's a really, really significant one. And that's according, that's 456 billion, significant amount of money. And yeah, China coming out is quite high, India extremely high. So we do see kind of patterns of impacts here as well. One to flag, especially the G7 announcement around the Fashion Pact has a huge focus on biodiversity. Now we see a big link between freshwater and biodiversity. So this is a map of ecosystem service threats from water issues. And again, if you overlay it, it's pretty well correlated with those regions. Labouring the point a little bit, but you get the idea. And that's 44% of the global production would be potentially linked to those issues. And you see quite consistent issues around Vietnam, Italy, Bangladesh, all the important countries. Now, the first thing I wanted to do in terms of the strategy that companies take is to really look at the SDG 6 in particular and look at what companies tend to have done historically in terms of addressing water impacts. So what we see is there's a push to do philanthropic work, which is great, around things like WASH, access to water and sanitation, and kind of more nice to do projects, and then also a strong focus on impact reduction within maybe first and second tier suppliers of the big brands who are worried about sustainability. This is great, but actually this may not be enough to get us to the finish line, especially, that hasn't really worked, especially given that there are actually some other factors that are less obvious. So things like the prevalence of droughts and floods and the issue around climate change is going to be an issue to deal with. Impacts from other sectors are going to be critical to managing this, and that's not something that the industry can tackle on its own. Worker health and food, that says, although I don't think you can see it. Energy, infrastructure investment, and reputational issues are going to become more and more of a problem. And particularly the lack of governance capacity and regulation is some of the underlying drivers of all these impacts that you see on those maps. So it's estimated that the operational value risk, so basically the physical threat from water issues, is approximately 58% of global production. But if you look at the reputation and governance issues, it's 69%. So it's actually a higher risk in total, according to the countries that are actually seeing those problems. So in terms of types of issues around policy, one of them is around sort of enforcement and institutions. So this is not super easy to read. I'm sorry, it's not formatted beautifully. But we went through the way that countries are reporting against SDG 6.5 in terms of these key production regions and actually analysed what is the value of those countries and how well are they doing on these different types of issues. So, for example, how well is their institution set up to manage water? How well are they managing these impacts and enforcing them? So there's a lot of significant issues popping up in all these key regions. And we see the same if we look at the regulatory risk map and then the SDG analysis. And actually the other thing that's somewhat troubling is that some of these countries aren't even reporting. So India across the board is not reporting at all on SDG 6.5, and that's an obvious gap. So if we look at this SDG strategy picture again, what we can start to see is that actually because there are such underlying issues around governance in these regions that may, for example, actually mean that apart from these very leading sites, nobody's treating their wastewater, or people are over-extracting groundwater, or that there's a lack of planning around disasters. These are actually going to be fundamental business risks to this sector. So the response to that is probably, first of all, to think about impacts beyond just volume and quality. So thinking about ecosystem service impact from operations, but also really moving into this advocacy space. So thinking not just about what is my role to reduce my harm through the SDGs, but actually what contribution can a company, a textiles company in particular, make to delivering on all these other elements of SDG 6. So some of the ones about integrated water resource management, those are issues that this sector and companies in general can get involved with and support the delivery of. And actually one thing I also wanted to flag is that sometimes philanthropy around WASH isn't the right solution. You're better off helping the government to develop their approach to rolling out WASH services in the longer term than doing a band-aid solution and donating. It's not that that's bad, but that is a risk because actually then you could have dependency in long term. So really, we as WWF want to encourage everybody to move much more strongly into this advocacy space. And what we're going to hear from today is quite a few brands who have actually taken that journey with us already. And also we're going to hear about the projects that are already ongoing on the ground that start to take on this challenge around supporting governance and supporting the delivery of SDG 6.5. Just a quick one, again, not great formatting, it's jumped around a lot, but this is to say what we also looked at is how much a percentage of these countries' export value came from textiles. Some of them, like Bangladesh, I think the data is a little bit wobbly because it says 150-something percentage of their exports are textiles, but let's say it's a high number. A lot of these other countries, you still see that China, according to the World Trade data, is significantly dependent on the textile sector. You definitely see that in Bangladesh. You see it quite strongly in Vietnam. This is a sector that has value for these governments, value for these economies. This is a sector that can actually have a voice potentially in trying to make a transition towards better management of water. So what we've already seen is that gathering this voice as a sector together and using it to support the government in better management and better approaches to governance is an effective strategy to take to addressing these fundamental issues that we're all facing. That's it. So I'd like now to welcome Angela, who is going to give you an overview of the projects that WWF does in all these different textile regions. And then, she's going to give you an insight into what's been happening.
Oh, God. Yeah, I want you to count the time for me. Thanks. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here, even after a lot of people are leaving. I don't know if you can hear, but a lot of people are leaving. And so I work with the country basis. So let's say where we have the boots on the ground. And WWF has the boots on the ground in all these countries when it comes to water stewardship. And it's over 80 people globally working on it. But today we're going to just focus in a small part of it, which is the textile and apparel. So we're going to be focusing those countries. If you see, okay. If you see here in red, you can see the places where we have global partnerships. In green, you can see the beef and leather production, and in blue, you see the countries where we are working in water stewardship in textile. And you can see the names of the countries here and also the brands. So my task, the brands that are supporting us in this journey, my task was to pick from these countries the ones that I would show to you here. I have selected two, and I'm very heartbroken, so I'm really going to talk to you a little bit about two more that you can see there. I'm not going to tell you in details, but we have our colleague, our Chinese colleague here, and I want to tell you that China is doing a great work, especially when it comes to the governance, the political engagement within the country to move the legislations toward a more green and sustainable textile sector in China. Vietnam is in the same path. In Vietnam, WWF and the partners were supporting the development of a green textile vision for the country. But I wanted to talk to you about something that is more tangible, especially because we are in a water conference and we want to talk about what is going on in the ground. And I'm going to talk to you about Turkey and India. So let's start with Turkey. We are working in the Buyuk Menderes Basin. The team in WWF Turkey works there since 2015. And this is a basin that it's very important. You can see the numbers in terms of exports. But the most important thing in this basin that you can see is that we have leather production upstreams. In the middle of the basin, we have textile. And at the bottom of the basin, like at downstreams, we have cotton production. So it's a basin where we have basically all the textile, not all the textile supply chain, but we have everything there. And it's a base also that faces great risks. So we have the economic risk that the factories, the brands and the factories are facing due to the water quality issues, mainly, and the negative impacts it can generate in the river. We have water scarcity because we have a lot of consumption, and also there is a little bit of a competition with other uses of water in the basin. And all the pollution, the competition for water is leading to the loss of biodiversity. The project in Turkey, it has 5 main parts. One of the parts is cleaning production. So we have this goal to work with 50 dyeing houses there. But we don't stop there. We also want to finance, and we want to have technical and political mechanisms that will help these factories to improve. We want to want to have the collective action. We want to work with other stakeholders in the basin towards a good governance. And we want to improve the landscape. So we've seen that we have basically a long area where we have different challenges and different users. And we also have in the basin wetlands that are areas of interest for WWF. So we are working also at the landscape level for the wetlands restoration. And the last part, we want to try to integrate the cotton and the textile within this water stewardship strategy. So the project is very successful. What I want to mention to you is that we have developed guidelines together with H&M. We have done already 14 feasibility studies. And how does it work? And we have engaged several brands, even local Turkish brands. And I was talking to our colleagues today, and they said the fact that the international brands are joining this committee, it's really taking also the local brands towards more sustainable practice, to more green, towards cleaning production. One important aspect, and that's maybe the easiest success that we can sell in this project, is the fact that we have the support of the brands to do feasibility studies. And with this grant, with the seed money, we managed to create a full cycle of investments towards the improvement of the work inside the factories. So it's a win-win solution because we finance this feasibility study. After that, they are able to get funds from banks with lower interest rate in order to be able to implement the change. But this is inside the factory, and we said that collective action is outside the factory. So I'm going to bring you to another project that has this component as well, but it's not. It's has also a very strong component that is the landscape. Doesn't mean that we don't have it in Turkey, but that's just because I have only 2 examples, so that's the 2 I'm showing. So water stewardship in India, we are working in the Noyal Bhavani Basin. And it's a highly urbanized area. Coimbatore and Tirupur, they are very strong textile. They have a lot of suppliers in the textile chain for India, and they depend on water from the interbasin transfer. And the basin itself, it has the huge city, has industry, so there are many different impacts that in the basin. Here you can see the picture of the textile sector. So we have Coimbatore and Tirupur. We have 35% of the export earnings in the basin, and the quality of the river is also compromised. We have 500 registered dyeing mills, but we also have very small units that are contributing to the pollution as well. But maybe what we don't often know is that this region is also an area of interest because of the Western Ghats. So there is the largest population of Bengal tigers in India is in this region. So we are not working only with this part, only with textile. In our roadmap, we really want to understand how the basin itself is working and to set up pilot plants that can help us to understand what are the interactions and how this work in textile can really support the overall development of the basin. And so this is just to give you an example. Sorry, I think I'm looking at the... So we work at the site level, so it's similar to what people are doing in Turkey. Within the factory, and then we work at the local level because we're not limiting ourselves to what is going inside the factories. We want also to support the overall water quality in the river, so we need to know what's going on in the urban area. And then at the level of the basin, we work with the protection of the catchment, the e-flows, and we study the ecosystems. And also we are doing some hydrological models for aquifer assessment to understand how is the pressure on the groundwater. So those are the, we divided the basin in 6 different parts. And you can see that the part in yellow is where we have Coimbatore and Tirupur, but due to the support of our partners, we are mobilizing like around 10 different NGOs in the country and around 6 different experts that are working in the different areas. So, and that's maybe the hidden part. So I'm here talking to you about what they are doing in Turkey and in India, but behind us there's so many people working on it. And when I tell you about collective action, sometimes people think about brands working together, but that's actually only one part of it. The collective action is when we manage to get all these people working towards objective that's having this river healthy. In this case, it's the Noyal Bhavani River, but we are working the same way for the Taihu Lake Basin, for the Buyuk Menderes, and also for the Mekong Delta. So I thank you for your attention, and if you've seen on the tables, we have the brochures that you can see a little bit more about the projects, also the projects that I didn't talk about. Thank you.
Fantastic. So now I'm going to welcome up our panelists. So if you guys can come, I'm going to arrange you nicely on the stage, and then a couple of people have slides. So what we're going to do is people will get up and do the slides and then come back down. So yeah, please join me. And first, we're going to hear from PVH and Tommy Hilfiger. So actually, I'm going to grab you as you go past. Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Which one might be? Okay, that one. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Farrell, and for those of you who don't know, PVH is the parent company that owns brands such as Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and our heritage brands, which includes Speedo, Izod, and Van Heusen, and much more. Corporate responsibility has been at the heart of how we do business for over 25 years. And this year, we launched the next evolution of our sustainability strategy, Forward Fashion. This iteration of our sustainability strategy builds off of our existing initiatives, but deepens our level of ambition so that we can drive lasting impact for our business, the industry, and work in new ways that are innovative and responsible for transforming our industry. Within our forward fashion strategy, we have 3 areas of focus where we can drive our biggest impact as we aim to 1, reduce our negative impacts to 0, 2, increase our positive impacts to 100%, and then lastly, 3, improve 1 million lives throughout our value chain. Within each of these 3 areas of focus, Within each of these 3 areas of focus, we have prioritized 15 areas, which you'll see on the screen behind me. And within each of these areas, we have established targets, which the business is driving towards. It is, and what I would say, as you can see highlighted in red, central to improving the lives of those throughout our value chain is our commitment to ensure access to clean water in communities of PVH's key sourcing basins. And what I would then say is separate to that, or in tangent with that, we also have a target for to establish 5 collective action projects in our key areas of water stress in our sourcing communities. So what's good to note for all of you right now is that we've made significant progress on this target already. And what I'm going to do is, Angela already highlighted one of them, but I'm going to just highlight for you where we have collective action projects across our sourcing communities. And I will take it to the next slide. So through our work with Calvin Klein, you've already just heard about the great work that's going on at the Kaveri River Basin, so I won't allude to that anymore. Secondly, we have our heritage brands who are working to preserve and protect Lake Hawassa in Hawassa, Ethiopia. PVH is an anchor tenant through a joint venture in the Hawassa Industrial Park, and so our ambitions here is to move beyond the park fences and make lasting positive impacts, and we're also partnering with GIZ on this effort as well. And then lastly, we have Tommy Hilfiger, who's working to preserve water resources in China and Vietnam, and I'm going to pass it to Sue, who's going to talk more about the work that's going on in China.
Hi, so I'm Sue Irvin, and I'm here today representing one of the PVH brands, which is Tommy Hilfiger. So Taihu is one of the most mature projects that's been going to date, and I really wanted to be here today to be able to share some of the amazing results that's happened so far. If we look on the slide here, it's kind of weird to be able to see it in both places. One of the great things that's happened quite recently actually is the training app that's been released. That's really there to supply suppliers with information and knowledge on water risk, shares policy and information and the effect that that has on different sites, as well as educates those people within the supply chain on how actions within and outside of the factory fence can address shared water challenges. Additionally to that, we've continued to have supplier trainings. We still believe that face-to-face training is a really effective way to get information across. And actually last year, 160 suppliers were trained around water stewardship, risk, policy, and really just getting knowledge across to them. This, of course, wasn't limited to Tommy Hilfiger suppliers because we're in this as a collective action with other brands as well. We also realized that training suppliers is not enough. You really, in order to get mass scale, need to also address at an IP level. We set quite an ambitious target at the beginning of the program to drive 100 of the IPs to have trainings with those. In 2018, we already effectuated 17. So we've still got a little bit of a way to go, but we are really confident that by the end of 2020, we'll have addressed our goal. One of also a really important part and one of the results has been the Taihu platform, which is a great platform to address and work through sort of strategy development, where basically the international forum is where all the different stakeholders come together and discuss policy, how to move forward and build that strategy and how we will move forward in terms of the whole Taihu Basin project. Governments, academia, NGOs, of course brands, private sector and water experts are all coming within this forum. So we really then have the right people around the table to address how we move forward and what the next steps need to be. Of course, we're not doing this alone, and I say we, but I mean the royal we, as in, of course, the other brands that are joining us on this program, which H&M and Target are working with us. H&M, we're actually the founding partner, and we're, of course, recently Chibo joined us. I don't know whether they're in the room, but you know, all these brands are now working collectively to drive impact in this area, and I think that's also been one of the great successes. Of course, goes to say that WWF also, their expertise, their knowledge, as well as their relationships with governments has been instrumental in making this super successful and driving the results that we're already getting. I think that also then sort of links me a little bit with the move towards our Vietnam project, which I'm absolutely thrilled to tell you that we've now just finalized our plan in the last week, where we'll start to do a similar program within the Mekong Basin, which we're excited to get started on. And I think it's the learnings that we've taken from Taihu and all of the experts that we've been working with will be able to, of course, drive that. And I think that sort of leads me to ask, of course, or put it out there that, you know, at the minute, Tommy Hilfiger is the brand partner for in Vietnam. So if there are other brands who are interested in joining, well, that's something that I think Layla will probably be putting out shortly, but there's opportunity there to be involved, and of course we would love to have partners with us there from other brands. And with that, I think that's all I have to say.
Fantastic.
So thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. So maybe Michael, I'll ask you to come up now and present. Okay, so just
my name is Michael Milstein. I manage global environmental policy and advocacy for Levi Strauss & Company. Probably familiar with the Levi's brand. We also have Dockers, Denizen, and Signature by Levi Strauss & Company. Over the next couple of minutes, what I'm going to speak to is our new approach to orient our own programs to be supportive of driving really basin-level impacts that fit within a broader contextual approach that responds to the conditions on the ground. So what you have above me right now is a timeline of our water action. This is mostly focused on our internal program action and some big milestones that we've hit, but also touches on some industry collaborative projects, be it the ZDHC initiative or Better Cotton, which enable us to drive impacts with other brands and really to use our kind of economies of scale to advance things across the industry. One thing that you can kind of notice as you peel back the layers on these programs, though, is that they're focused on a lot of sort of process-oriented performance metrics, not necessarily a lot of outcome-oriented metrics. And so as we sort of look to the future beyond 2020 in terms of how we want to address our own impacts, but also engage in collective action, we want to make sure that we're taking an outcome-oriented approach. So this tees up our 2025 Water Action Strategy, which we actually just released last week. We view collective action as well as our internal programs as being really key to getting where we need to go. Resiliency, which is one of the key components of the business case for apparel brands to act on sustainability, it really extends beyond the four walls of our facility, right? Within a facility, we can be hyper efficient, we can do everything right, but if the larger water basin, the watershed isn't healthy, then our supplier, our company isn't resilient. But we do see that we can look at environmental factors, environmental data that's out there, be it WWF's data sets, WRI's data sets, and use those to match our existing programs that we have and really deploy them to drive the greatest impact. So the key tenets of our strategy are Well, first, the vision is to ultimately use only as much water as natural replenishes wherever we operate. And of course, a liter of water in a dry place isn't necessarily the same value as a liter of water in the wet place. So in terms of water reductions, we want to really focus on those water-stressed areas. So in manufacturing, we're committing to reduce our water use in highly water-stressed areas 50% by 2025. And then to make sure that we're scaling, we'll set targets that correspond to levels of water stress, low, medium, high, across our value chain for our tier 1 and 2 suppliers, and ensure that all of our key suppliers, representing over 80% of our product and fabric volume, are hitting those targets. So as we look at target setting, as I was mentioning, we'll really look at the data sets that are out there and try to look at each water basin and at levels of water stress across the board and set targets that are specific. It does our suppliers no good to take a one-size-fits-all approach and to make really large asks of suppliers that aren't necessarily water stressed, right? On the flip side, if we can provide this data, this water data, this environmental data, and go to our suppliers in highly stressed areas, we can really support them and advise them on how they can make strong investments that will promote their resiliency long term. And then we can think about how this will fit into a broader watershed approach. I've highlighted South Asia here, and I can talk about what we're doing in terms of materials, manufacturing, as well as collective action. Going forward, we want to make sure that we're hitting on all 3 fronts in these critical watersheds. So on materials, in India and Pakistan, we're sourcing over 2/3 better cotton. And by 2020, all of the cotton that we will source will be either better cotton, organic cotton, or recycled cotton. So really driving the efficiency, the water efficiency of our primary raw material base and decreasing its contribution to water stress. In terms of manufacturing, in India and Pakistan, we have a number of suppliers that are adhering to our recycle and reuse program, which is really allowing them to be self-sufficient, not contributing to water stress where they're operating. And these components are really important as we then look to collective action, where we want to make sure that we are involving local stakeholders and working with NGOs and multilaterals to drive action and really address needs, galvanize investments. So in Pakistan, we're partnering with WWF, Earth Genome, and Arizona State University in the Ravi River Basin. And through this work, what we're able to do is provide very detailed mapping of water stress to pinpoint sources, and then we can involve local stakeholders on the ground and enable them to implement these solutions that make the most sense. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to check if this is working. Can people hear with this microphone? Yeah, great. So, Vanilla, or you can come up here. Choice is yours.
Thank you. Thanks. So my name is Pernilla Haldin. I work as a stakeholder engagement for climate and water at the H&M Group and public affairs. And I work with in our global sustainability department. The H&M Group consists today of 8 brands, and we have around 270 people throughout the organization working with sustainability. So sustainability is a continuous process. We started in the 1990s, and then it was more question focused on chemicals and on social issues. Water came up more around 2008, and that's when we focused more on the suppliers. And then 2015 climate came, and now biodiversity is a focus. And now I'm just touching upon the environmental topics. So it's really a continuous process, continuous learning and continuous development. So 2008, we started to work on water with our suppliers. And that was really to raise the awareness, to measure and take actions, which is of great importance. But of course, when you see that the water coming out from those factories are cleaner, but the basin is still very, very dirty, then you see that there is no use to be a clean fish in a dirty pond. So collaborations there is key. Collaborations with brands, but also other industries is really key. So 2011, when we started our long-term partnership with WWF, that is really when the water kicked off, the work on water kicked off for us. And collaborations there together with WWF is really, really crucial. So how easy is it to raise awareness on water when there is no price on water? When the water is either don't have a price or is pretty cheap? I think that is one of the crucial challenges that we have. And that is when the policy work comes in. And that I think is one of the most important things that we need to do and that we are doing. And that is actually the fifth step of the WWF stewardship ladder. We need to work with that. We do it, we have done it, and we need to do it much, much more. That is a collaboration with governments. And there's a lot of countries that have good regulations, but then there is a big lack of implementation. So that's also another thing. Looking into, we have a vision of being all our suppliers 100% recycled water in Tier 1 and Tier 2. A vision is good to have. And as soon as there is a science-based target out there, we're going to apply for that. It's really important to have good targets. And I think we were the first brand to put in data in the WWF water risk filter tool. And that is where we show we're very transparent with all the data from our suppliers. And that's also key, data and transparency. That's key to drive impact. But all these vision, goals, data and transparency, key for impact and key for collaborations. So that is the message that we want to send out to everyone who want to join, who are joining in the collaborations. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Vanilla. So, building on that a little bit, I probably want to start by maybe actually asking you, Michael, to speak about how did you make the case internally in Levi's to work on water? Because as you were saying, you know, it's maybe a more abstract issue, it's not priced particularly well, it can be one that doesn't get the first priority. So how did you make that case, and how could other brands sort of also make the case internally to work on this? Sorry, you want to...
So I think there are three main drivers or incentives for brands to act on water. The first is just purely from an efficiency standpoint. When our suppliers save water, they save energy. And when they save energy, they save money, right? And so by implementing water efficiency, they are reducing their bottom line really two ways. Secondly, as I mentioned briefly, it's a resiliency play. The footwear and apparel supply chain, really manufacturing globally, as Leila mentioned, sits across an area of water stress, right? And so if we want to have consistency through our entire industry's supply chain, supplier base, it's really important that we promote the resiliency of these suppliers. And a great way that we can build climate resiliency is by promoting the self-sufficiency and the water efficiency of our vendors. And then the third thing is that consumers are increasingly savvy and demanding really solid, fundamental, progressive action by brands. It's no longer sufficient really to just say, yeah, we have these programs and we have these techniques that we're applying to products. Consumers want to understand the impacts that brands are having, which is a big part of why we've sort of reoriented our approach to focus on connecting the tools we have at our disposal with the watershed outcomes.
Fantastic, thanks. I might pivot now to Pernilla. Yeah. We're having to pass it around a little bit. Because I know you have a lot of focus on policy in particular, part of sometimes the nervousness of brands or private sector actors to get involved in sort of collective action and policy engagement is the fear that it's not the right role for them, or that it's difficult and scary, which maybe it is. So what would you say in terms of what you see as the right role for a private sector brand like H&M or others to take in terms of supporting water governance?
Well, I think you have to remember that if you have the absolute best government on earth, the absolute best, they still don't know what we're doing unless we tell them. So it's not, there is nothing to be scared of. It is just to share the experience that we have and what we are doing and what we're aiming for, because there is always a win-win, always. So it's it's merely an educational process in that sense. But of course, you have to be clear on what you want from them. That otherwise they will not know. But for me, for me and for us, I think it's really you need to. They cannot guess what we're doing. They cannot guess what we're aiming for. We need to tell them. And if they see that we are, many of us, seeing it in the same way, and that there is a win for them as well, I don't see I don't see a problem at all.
Yeah, and maybe breaking down that tradition of seeing it as almost like an adversarial relationship between government and private sector, that they're regulating to stop the bad guys. It's not really.
So for me, they are as an important stakeholder as all the NGOs and organizations and other brands. And a natural one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe if you can pass to Megan. What would you share with other brands in terms of what you've maybe learned about this kind of approach? Because obviously there's a bit of a culture shock maybe working with an NGO sometimes, and also working outside the factory fence where it's not sort of traditional for a brand to engage. So what do you think the biggest learning or the lesson would be for you guys?
Yeah, of course. And I can start with this, and then I can let my colleague Sue contribute as well if she'd like to. I would say, inclusivity of stakeholders is just absolute paramount to the success of these engagements. You need to come with open arms and really being willing to listen and learn from everyone who's been in the community and understands what the issues are. It's a very humbling experience, and you want to have everyone involved. I would say, secondly, because of that inclusivity approach, it sometimes makes it very difficult to coordinate, and sometimes you're slow to get things started, and that's natural in the beginning of any of these projects. As Layla alluded to, potentially some actors can be more difficult than others, but that varies by every project. And I think the one thing I've been really impressed by is everyone's just willingness to make things work and make it happen. It's been really inspiring to be a part of these projects. And Sue, do you want to add?
I think to continue to what Megan has just said there, I think one thing is you have to be patient. It takes time. You need to collaborate. I mean, on top of also what Megan said is that it does take, you do need to bring a lot of stakeholders around the table. And I think, we've also realized at Tommy Hilfiger that it has to be a multifaceted approach. So in our experience, bringing the suppliers in and the IPs in has been great, but then you also need to look at this from a basin level as well as governmental level. And I think without all of those sort of four sets of actors, this program, having collective action just won't work. We also found it really helpful to have a solid plan, and a solid plan that all the other brands within that group are working towards, so we all at least know where the goal is, so we're on the same sort of road, which I think has been super helpful. But time and patience has also been something interesting.
Thanks.
If I can just add really quickly,
Yeah.
I think working with leading NGOs in space also just lends a lot of credibility to the work, right? We're always looking for key NGOs to endorse our programs, whatever they are, and when we can join in partnership with them, really lends again, a lot of credibility.
Thanks. So maybe what I want to do, because we're running out of time and I could talk to you guys about this for a long time, maybe each of you could give one key message to say to maybe others in the industry, like, what do you think the future would look like for collective action, and what would you hope that they would take from this session? So it's a big one to throw at you, but if you have any inspiration.
Can I make a classic one?
Yes, please.
A little
Classics are
proverb.
great.
Some say it's a Chinese, some say it's an African. If you go alone, you go fast. If you go together, you go further.
Yeah.
That's a great way of summarizing it. Again, I would just say I would love to see more of these projects come to fruition, and to have more actors involved, other brands in our projects and in future projects. And I would just say my ask or my message to you is, if you're feeling discouraged or hesitant because you're thinking that you don't have the funding required to be a part of this, I would please question that and come to the table. I think there's all different types of ways that you can contribute, and we just want everyone to get involved in this great work.
I think the first thing is just the importance of the recognition of addressing water in local context, and then in order to really do that, brands have to be willing and able to drive impact reductions in that local context within their four walls, but then also collaborating and driving that outside their four walls. And where there are these platforms, such as the one that WWF is putting forward, is really a great infrastructure to drive change. A lot of the work really can be shared across the multi-stakeholders.
It's always worse being the last, I think, 'cause I think the other guys have covered it all. But I think, sort of touching on all points, it's something we have to do. We can't get away from this. If we don't do something now, then it's not even worth thinking about. It's exciting, it's rewarding, and I think we're already reaping the results of what's already happened. So as the other said, just join in, be part of this, be part of something that's going to really change water for the future.
Fantastic note to finish on, guys. Thank you so much to my panel. I thought this was amazing. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for taking part.
Thank you, Layla.